Saturday is a really special day when it comes to the work week around the world. And that's because it is the one day that most overlaps in varying systems of creating weekends or a weekend day. And in English, Saturday is really special because it's the only day of the week that didn't get translated into the Germanic version of the 7 planets that the days of the week eventually became named after. So in English, there's a real Saturday mystery. And we'll talk about that today on Life's Potluck Buffet. I'm John Paulus. Thanks for joining me. If you're enjoying Life's Potluck Buffet, please subscribe. If you've already subscribed, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. And if you have a Brave browser, you can now contribute basic attention tokens to Life's Potluck Buffet with John Paulus on YouTube. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening. I'm going to have to take this back to the 1st century CE. Now, that's when in the Roman Empire, the idea of a 7-day week with the names of the days being the names of the 7 known planets. I'll talk about that in a second, because then 2 of them aren't planets in our sense of the word. And that seems to be when that started to happen. Before that, there was what we would call an 8-day week that was counted inclusively, where the first day and the last day of the week were the same day of the week in our counting. And so it would be a 9-day week technically. Anyway, that goes back much longer on that peninsula, and that is not going to be that relevant to what we're talking about today. But somewhere in the 1st century CE, and we have this from Graffito written before the eruption of Vesuvius, so we have a date after which it couldn't have happened. We have a Graffito that on a wall that says clearly Sunday, and that is the day of the sun. And so we have a sense that the system was already in place then, or getting into place, where you had a week that is 7 days. Now, this 7-day interval for a week, there were systems in the world that did 7-day intervals for a week. Famously, there were some in Mesopotamia that had done 7-day of the week intervals, because they were splitting up the month, the lunar month, by basically by kind of the phases of the moon. And so with 4 phases, you're then breaking the month into more or less 7-day weeks of 4. And so you can see how that may have arisen from that. But nonetheless, it came into place. And the 7, what are called the 7 classical planets, were the basis around which the week was organized. And so that tells us that this has to be coming from a mindset that has this setup, which was prevalent for sure in areas where the Roman Empire had expanded to. And there was another 7-day calendar that was also used in religious cycles, that was also prevalent in that same area of the Roman Empire. And that is the calendar associated with Judaism. That calendar had 7 days, where the first day is what we in modern English terms would call Sunday, and the 7th day was the Sabbath. And that seventh day, the Sabbath, was obviously of central importance of the religious week in that community, and still is today. And authors of that time who weren't part of that community but were observing the practices of the Jewish community of the Roman Empire noticed that on the day of Saturn, what we would call Saturday in modern English, that people of that community did not ceased from work on that day. And that is, of course, the Sabbath, the Shabbat of Judaism, which in that reckoning is the last day of the week. But in the Roman system, Saturday was the first day of the week. So that's interesting as well. So there's a kind of dissonance between what day of the week was being spoken about in terms of the new system versus the old system versus the Jewish system of reckoning the week. Now, if you fast forward a little bit, Christian authorities started to think that, well, maybe the days of the week just needed to be numbered, and that's again, this is very similar to Hebrew names for days of the week. Outside of the Sabbath, the other ones are just numbered. So there was an attempt to say, okay, what we are going to do is we are going to number the days, and then we'll also have the Sabbath, and then we're going to call the first day, we're going to call that the Lord's Day. That's what we know as Sunday, and we're going to go from there. And some languages kept that system. For example, in modern Greek, the days of the week are mostly numbered except for the Lord's Day, Sunday, the Sabbath, Saturday. And in modern Greek, Friday is the name that is the day of preparation for the Sabbath. And so it is called Preparation Day. Now, that is interesting. People who look at how the week came about as it is in various places see that as a kind of echoing of the Jewish tradition, because, well, you may know that the Jewish day of Sabbath actually begins on sundown on Friday, and so, well, what we call Friday today in English. And so in some sense, the day time of that day is a lead up to the Sabbath. So then all of a sudden the Greek name of Preparation Day starts to make a lot more sense in terms of coming out of that Jewish tradition. And there are other traditions around the world. For example, in the Mandarin language, the days of the week are for the most part numbered, except for the first day of the week, which is the equivalent of our Sunday. That is not numbered. The last day of the week, which is Saturday, is the sixth day of the week. And so you have now a lot of numbering systems around the world that a lot of people who use numbering systems, for sure. For the most part, the planetary system, that is with the sun, moon, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, that group of, well, things that you see in the sky from Earth. Obviously, Earth is not included as a planet, although there are systems that use things like fire, water, earth as their days of the week, and use those kind of elements, as we would call them in English. Those are places like Japan, Korea, also across the ocean. In South American languages like Quechua, there are also the different system where it's more based on elements, and Also, there for the Japanese and Korean system, the Saturday is Earth Day. So just so you know. So there are other systems for sure outside of the numbering and the planetary. There are also element systems, and there are some systems that didn't have 7-day weeks that had to figure out how to create 7-day weeks. So, for example, Yoruba days of the week, there were 4 originally. And so to make that fit into the 7-day week it required some fiddling. And, of course, borrowings, such as in countries where Islam is the major religion, Fridays are consistently the day of gathering because that's when big Friday prayers happen and there's a gathering of the congregations for prayers. And even in those systems, Saturday is, well, the Sabbath. And that is because it's drawing on that tradition I was talking about earlier. Now, the presence of an important religious event of the week on the day we call in English Friday meant that in those systems where Islam was the main religion, you're going to want to have that day of the week be set aside as a special day. And so in places where Islam is the main religion, you'll see that often Friday and Saturday are the weekend. And you will also see instances where Saturday and Sunday are the weekend, but Friday has a big chunk of time given over to the prayer and gathering for prayer. And you'll also see systems where Friday and Sunday are the 2 days of the week that are given special importance as a weekend kind of status, the places in Southeast Asia in particular. And there is also the situation where just Friday is the only weekend day. And that happens in a couple of places. Now, the idea that one day is a weekend day is the kind of rarest occurrence of this is in Nepal, where Saturday is the only day of the weekend, which is interesting because now there's a system where only Saturday is, and then you have a lot of Friday, Saturday weekends, and you also have a lot of Saturday, Sunday weekends. So see, Saturday, that's what I'm saying about Saturday being a kind of frequently special day of the week. Now, this is very interesting because in Hindu traditions, Saturday is named after Shani, which is I'll say equivalent to the Roman Saturn. So that's kind of fascinating as well. That there is now in their name is just the translated version in a sense of the Saturday situation going on, but that Saturday is very important for in some places for fasting during the daytime, and it is one of those special days of the week in some places around the world, and a lot of people are in those places. So that's a very important one too in terms of the specialness of Saturday. Now, here's what happened with the week in English. So, in the Roman system, you have the Sunday, the day of the sun, right? You have the Monday, which is the day of the moon. Those in English got translated from the Sol for sun and Luna for moon into sun and moon, just the older versions of this. Now, notice that English didn't go with the framework that you see in a lot of other languages starting in Europe And that's that framework that says the Sunday should be named the Lord's Day. So you have words like Domenica or Dimanche, or Kyriaki in Greek, and those all have to do with the Lord's Day. Now, the English week was not translating that Christian week, but rather translating the Roman pre-Christian week into English. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the Tuesday, which is from the famous holiday celebration of Mardi Gras in places that are French-speaking and Catholic Christians, that Mardi, that's Mars Day, right? So Tuesday is Mars Day in the Roman system, that Roman system that started in around the 1st century CE. So there you have, in English, you have the equivalent of Mars was a god named Tyr, and that is where we get Tuesday. And that god is also considered warlike in the same way Mars is considered to be a quintessential warrior. And the name is spelled Ty with an accent on it, R, a cute accent. And that is where we get the idea for naming the day named after the planet Mars for the god Mars to the god Tyr. And this is just generally, there was a clear correspondence. We have evidence for a clear correspondence where Romans were translating Tyr into Mars. Now, Wednesday is Mercury, and there's an idea that the reason that Woden or Odin, who Wednesday is named after, Woden's Day, that particular god may have been the equivalent of Mercury, again, in kind of Roman interpretation of Germanic art, because of similar styling of wearing a cap and having a wand and things like that. And there were other reasons as well that Woden and Mercury got put together as these two kind of go together. And so we have Wednesday, which ultimately is probably from Woden's Day. And now this is interesting because here's one where there is a kind of break between English and other Germanic languages, because in, say, German today, in Standard German, Mittwoch, or middle of the week, is the name of Wednesday. Now, that's very interesting because there are a couple of more cases of this that we'll see, most importantly, Saturday. Now, the Thursday is, named after Thor, and Thor as a god of thunder and lightning and so forth, very similar to Zeus or Jupiter if you're a Roman. So the day of Jove, as it's called in the Latin of the time, the day of Jove is, in fact, what becomes the day of Thor, or Thor's day. And in, say, Italian, for example, it's Giovedì, right? It's still Jove's day, still Jupiter's day. Friday, now in the Latin version, this is the day of Venus. And the equivalent to Venus in this system of day naming is the goddess Frigg. This is not to be confused with Freya. Frigg is a different goddess, although there has been a lot of confusion about that. But since there was thought to be an equivalence, the most people think that it's in fact Frigg's day and not Freya's day. So the Frigg goddess, not the Freya goddess. But again, there's a lot of confusion about their roles, and there could very well have been confusion in at the time when these names were being created for the days of the week in these Germanic languages. And so finally we come to Saturday. Now, early on in these language, Saturday is spoken of as, say, like in early versions of English, Saturday can be Sun's Eve. So like Sonnenabend, And in German, there are actually two different words for Saturday. One which tends to be used in the northern parts of Germany and also in East Germany, and that's Sonnabend or Sonnabend, and that comes from that same Sun's Eve. So the idea here is that it's like Sunday Eve. And the other German word, which is used in the more southerly German-speaking areas, is Samstag, which is actually from the whole thing about the Sabbath, because that's from just the word for Sabbath, but Sabbath day, Samstag. And that makes those areas of German speakers more like, on the one hand, the older Germanic speakers for whom it was Sun Eve, or the Romance language speakers who even in systems in Romance languages where the days of the week are numbered. So, for example, in Portuguese, where they're numbers rather than planets, and the weekend, Saturday, Sunday, are the Sabbath, Sábado, and the Lord's Day, like many of the other Romance languages. Now it gets even weirder because in other languages, the Norse languages, the name for a Saturday is often something related to Old Norse Laugardag, which is, in Icelandic, it's Laugardag, which means washing day. It's a day when you bathe. It's bath day. And that use of Saturday makes this situation even weirder, because in places like Sweden, where you have very similar to the English days of the week, the Saturday used an old term, the wash day term, that probably came before the idea of Saturn's Day was around. So it's pretty clear that there's no clear connection to any other god name for Saturday. Now, Saturn was a Roman god that was actually, the word comes from Etruscan, which, remember, is that language that existed in areas that were central to the early Rome, but that were speaking a language that was already there and indigenous to the Italian peninsula when the people speaking the language that we now know as Latin arrived. Now that Saturn is considered a god of agriculture and fertility, and also the age of Saturn is a time when everything happens spontaneously without the need for human agricultural efforts, and it's a time of peace and a time of great prosperity and fertility of the land. So there's a possibility, I think, that there is a older deity that could have resulted in a different English word for Saturday if there was more interest in translating these things, which there seems to be some interest, but it seems like when you get to Saturday, it just seems like there's not much interest in kind of translating the concept of Saturn into a Germanic word. So, but the god I'm thinking of is Freyr, or sometimes known as Yngvi or Ingvaz. And this is a god that's particularly associated with kind of all of the things that Saturn is associated with, like fertility and peace and prosperity. So it's kind of interesting that we didn't end up with, Yngde or Freyr's Day. Maybe Freyr's Day would be too close to Friday, Freyr's Day, maybe. But that's never stopped a language before from having words that sound close to each other. But if there was really a kind of systematic attempt to kind of label each day with its Germanic name of a god that corresponded to the Roman god, then Saturday could have been Freyr's Day. But I have a feeling there could have been some issue there. And I think that's because Freyr means Lord. And so if you were to have a Lord's Day, well, I can see you wanting to avoid that when you have to deal with the possibility of Sunday being a Lord's Day. So there's an outside chance that may have resulted in just saying, okay, we're going to stick with Saturn's Day here because that is not the Lord's Day isn't going to work for Saturday. Well, let's ask the cards what they think about all of this and see what they have to say. So yellow lemons, blue dumplings, magenta noodles. Cards, tell us some things. It's card 17. Everything that happens to us is only partly our doing. There is no amount of plotting and planning that will result in us navigating our world exactly as we think we want to. So get in your ship, set a course, weigh anchor, and open your heart to the idea that you've been in the right port at the right time before, and you will be again. So name an unexpected opportunity that you said yes to that changed everything for you. And I'll see you tomorrow on Life's Potluck Buffet.